Sorry again for the technical delay. That was our mixer. My name is Kit Cabello. I'm the main host of Hardlands Media. This is my co-host, Kira Elliott.
Hi there.
We are a Chicago-based independent progressive media site here in the city of Chicago. We cover news that corporate media does not cover, and we are live streaming on different networks. We're live streaming on the Mikasa Sukasa network. Thank you, Nico House. We are in collaboration with him at this moment. More details with that a little bit down the road. We are also live streaming on the Hardlands Media YouTube page, Facebook page, Twitch account, and Periscope account. And the reason why we're able to do this is, again, because of our Patreon supporters. You are the guys that make this happen. We couldn't do this without any of you. So thank you guys, all of you, for helping us out. And also on the Hardlands Media YouTube page, in which we're live streaming at, we do have an event that's happening in the city of Chicago. So if you live in Chicago, we're already halfway out of the tickets. There's like maybe 8 tickets left to meet the Hardlands Media team. So we do hope to meet some of our Chicago-based fans. But with that being said, again, thank you again to Nico House for letting us live stream on his channel too. We are going to get started. So I'm going to pull up a video with our good friend George Snuffleupagus, or George Stephanopoulos. He's the host of ABC this week.
Wait, is that how you actually say it? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, that is actually how you say his name. And we're going to play a video where basically he is citing a source from the Daily Beast. We actually talked about this in a previous episode, and I want to let you guys see the video, and we're going to talk about really how inept corporate media is for citing a useless article. And I'm talking about the Daily Beast article in which they're citing Tulsi Gabbard as some sort of Russia agent, which is ridiculous.
Her speech that he said some Democrats are recoiling from past American foreign policy mistakes by looking to withdraw from our global leadership role. Does that apply to you?
No, it doesn't. You know, my focus has been coming from my experience. You know, I enlisted in the Army National Guard after the terrorist attack on 9/11, served as a soldier for over 16 years and deployed twice to the Middle East. In Congress, have served for over 6 years on both the Foreign Affairs and the Armed Services Committee, and bring that experience to the forefront, where as president, I will end these counterproductive and wasteful regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, recognizing how wasteful and costly these are, and take the trillions of dollars that we've been spending, would continue to spend, and invest those resources on serving the needs of the American people, things like healthcare, education, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, protecting our environment. There are many urgent needs here that we need to address, and we've got to get our priorities straight.
You resigned your DNC post back in 2016 because you thought Hillary Clinton had a hawkish interventionist foreign policy. Does that apply to her colleague in the Obama administration, former Vice President Biden?
We'll see what Vice President Biden's foreign policy vision is for this country. We may agree on some issues, disagree on others. The problem that I have seen is that across both Democrat and Republican administrations, and especially in this Trump administration, where right now he is leading us down this dangerous path towards a war with Iran.
All right. So, as you guys can see from that video, you know, we're seeing from ABC that they're just trying to constantly, or at least from corporate media, what they're trying to do is kind of bring up the fact that she's not playing the establishment game. And what I mean by this is that since Tulsi Gabbard entered into the Democratic primary race, from day one, she has been labeled as an Assad apologist, a Russian bot, someone who's radical, someone who doesn't fall in line with the DNC establishment talking points. And at the end of the day, from all these ridiculous articles, we're seeing that they're constantly being debunked because they're misrepresenting who Tulsi Gabbard really is. She's a strong progressive and an independent and someone who's actually seen the cost of war. The problem that I think the establishment sees in Tulsi Gabbard is that she's going to tip over the military-industrial complex and really upset their apple cart and the way they like to play their game. I, for one, am impressed at how she's able to handle her campaign, and yet time and time again, it's not establishment media that's correcting itself. It's independent media and individual voters and people who are just keeping an eye on just how ridiculous the establishment media is at this point. And the thing is, we've seen articles get debunked, like, for example, when Glenn Greenwald debunked the MSNBC article. We've seen how she handles herself in interviews with Jimmy Dore, Nico House, Joe Rogan, Kim Iverson, and numerous other independents that really show who she really is. She talks about policies and she's consistent. So, and again, there was also a article that came out from the Rolling Stone where it calls out the ridiculous coverage of Tulsi Gabbard and Senator Bernie Sanders. So I want to get your comments on this, Kira, because I know we were talking about this before the show started. So really, what do you think about this whole misrepresentation of Tulsi Gabbard?
It's not surprising, and I think that progressives are really starting to become keen to the fact that basically whoever the mainstream media is putting out as the worst candidate or the most dangerous candidate is usually the candidate we should probably be looking at. Mm-hmm. We learned that in the 2016 election, that generally they're not going to either give time to candidates that are very progressive and that might basically crumble the infrastructure of what we know now, where we have a lot of people with a few people with a lot of power, and a lot of money. And so, like I said, I'm not surprised, and I am eternally impressed by Tulsi Gabbard. And I actually she caught my attention the most when she did step down from her post in the DNC in, was it 2016? And I've been watching her ever since and impressed with her ever since, especially in the face of what the Democratic Party actually pushes, because I know it's got to be tough. I mean, really, when I put myself in the shoes of these progressives that are really fighting against basically their entire party, who's supposed to be on their team, I imagine it being very, very difficult. So that just goes to show that Tulsi Gabbard is probably one hell of a woman to be reckoned with, and I'm so excited to see her clean up in this primary race.
Well, also another thing I've noticed as well is that she is gaining a lot of support from independents and even some conservative voters as well. Recently, there's been a lot of positive comments on Tulsi Gabbard, especially on conservative news sites, like most notably Fox News.
Yeah,
where you do have Republican voters and libertarians and conservative voters actually saying, while I'd never vote Democrat, I would consider supporting Tulsi Gabbard. She's talking about something that I like. And perhaps maybe this can build a coalition of an anti-war movement. Of course, there's a difference between how conservatives and progressives and liberals and Republicans and Democrats all look at how we should not be involved in wars. Mm-hmm. But again, this is something that you want to do as a politician. This is politics 101, where you're in a race and you're trying to prove that you're the better candidate. You have to earn the voters' vote. That means you're going to be talking to people that maybe not will or probably will not like your party or who you're associated with unless they hear you speak. And there's a good chance, a 50-50 chance, that they will say, no, I'm going to vote for my party, or I like what this candidate's saying, I would consider supporting you. And that's what the Democrats failed in 2016 when they ran a corporate establishment fraud against a person like President Donald Trump, who, look, as difficult it is for corporate media to wrap its head around this, he was a populist at that current point in time. So the Democrats need to realize that the establishment talking points, the establishment media also needs to realize that their talking points are no longer valid. People are able to call it out. And we have this thing called the internet in which we can fact check a politician's record. And for the most part, when it comes down to people like Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Tulsi Gabbard, you see their record, you see how they vote, and they're consistent. And that's something all voters of different political backgrounds
They love consistency. Yeah. They love authenticity. And I really think that in general, they love the anti-war message. I know that we have this picture painted of, immigrant hating Trump supporters and blah, blah, blah. And certainly I'm not discounting that population exists. Right. However, I believe that one thing that does unite largely the right and left is the anti-war sentiment. Yeah. I know that people see that as being a huge waste.
Well, and also another thing, too, that's kind of gaining a lot of support is that, especially for Tulsi Gabbard and what's much the cringe of the DNC establishment, Republican establishment, mind you, I'm talking about the establishments, not the voters, but the establishment as well as corporate media, is that Tulsi Gabbard called out the ridiculous coup or failed coup attempt in Venezuela, and she's also calling out this administration for its potential setup for war with Iran. And you don't hear a lot of other Democratic candidates talking about this. And this goes to my final opinion in regards to this before we move on to our next story. Tulsi Gabbard has to be on the debate stages. Already as it stands right now, she's secured 2 spots already, and she's starting to gain some traction in the polls, but she's an important ally for Senator Bernie Sanders, especially going forward into the debates. She needs to be in more debates. She should get more coverage, and it kind of goes back to another statement I made as well, is that she's going to have to be aggressive in getting media coverage. She's going to have to go to places like Jimmy Dore, Nico House, Joe Rogan, and be on places that and actually get media attention for her, because she's going to have to go out there and get her message out. Corporate media won't do it. Now, for the most part, Fox News is doing that job. But at the end of the day, Fox News is just the same as CNN and MSNBC. It's corporate media. And the only way we're able to get informed about real progressive candidates, real independent candidates that want to bring in political change, we're going to have to go to independent media. And that's where Mika Sukasa, Heartlands Media, Tim Black, Jimmy Dore, and everyone else, we have to get that information out there to the public, and this is why we need to have a true force of state.
Yep.
So now moving on to another story. And I know we got a video for this one, but Kira, why don't you introduce it?
Yeah, this one's fantastic. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson really showed off his complete incompetence around his job and his condescension toward Congress. When Representative Katie Porter, a California Democrat, asked him about real estate-owned properties known as REOs. Okay, so that's the acronym, REOs. And if you don't work in this area or in real estate, or you're not expected to know these acronyms. But as the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, we really would hope and expect our secretary to know what an REO is. Unfortunately, during his congressional testimony on Tuesday, he was mistaking the REO for a delicious chocolate cookie that's sugar-filled and white. So
okay,
let's take
find
a
out,
look.
because I don't think I know what this cookie is.
As you look it up, I'd also like you to get back to me, if you don't mind, to explain the disparity in REO rates. Do you know what an REO is?
An Oreo?
No, not an Oreo. An REO. REO.
Real estate?
What's the O stand for?
Organization?
Owned. Real estate owned. That's what happens when a property goes to foreclosure. We call it an REO. And FHA loans have much higher REOs. That is, they go to foreclosure rather than to loss mitigation or to non-foreclosure alternatives like short sales than comparable loans at the GSEs. So I'd like to know why we're having more foreclosures that end in people losing their homes with stains to their credit and disruption to their communities and their neighborhoods at FHA than we are at the GSEs.
Ready. All right, are we on? All right, so
That was amazing.
Yes, it was. So 2 things before we want to give the rest of the story to you. Number 1, it does concern me that Ben Carson doesn't understand any aspect of his job. And then number 2, which is probably the good news, is that I'm kind of hungry for an Oreo right now. But, I mean, but that, again, Kira, let's get to more into the story.
We always knew that Ben Carson didn't know how to do his job. That's why he was put in that position.
Yes.
Okay, so Secretary Ben Carson, he was testifying before Congress because to defend basically a budget proposal that would cut 16.4% from HUD's budget, would raise rent as much as 150% on folks in subsidized housing, and would make it more difficult for undocumented immigrants to access affordable housing. So, through my laughing, I'm actually doing a lot of internal crying right now, because this is some serious shit right here. The hearing comes less than a week after the Government Accountability Office wrote a letter to Congress that HUD broke the law when it spent $40,000 for a 2017 dining set and dishwasher for Carson's office, if you guys remember that story from, last year, 2 years ago. So HUD's Federal Housing Authority had more REOs than did the government-sponsored enterprises, which are quasi-government, privately owned entities established to improve and make possible the flow of credit to specific sectors of the economy to provide essential services to the public. So basically what Representative Porter was asking about was, she was curious why they were having so many more foreclosures in the end, where people were losing their homes with stains to their credit and disruption to the communities and to their neighborhoods, whereas the government-sponsored enterprises were not. So, you know, it's really scary that we have people's lives crumbling, being tossed out on the street, rents raising, massive budgets being cut from the communities that need it the most. And here our HUD secretary thinks that Oreos are a delicious cookie. You know, and further, you know, you go further into this story and you start to see that, like, I get the sense that Ben Carson just kind of takes this all as a joke, just in general. So if you look further into how this, the testifying went, Carson tells a congresswoman to do her job at one point when she asked, so you're going to be shifting 55,000 children from being with their families to then a homeless status, when she was talking about the, putting in the rules around not allowing immigrants to be in HUD. Mm-hmm. And he replied, well, maybe what will happen with them is that you and Congress will do your job and solve the problem, which is just really flippant and really, you can see how the Trump administration all the way down refuses to take responsibility for their job, right, and for, you know, the positions that they've been vying for all of this time. It's like, why did you want this job if you aren't planning on doing the job? There was one other one, something with Ayanna Pressley, or she was asking him questions, and she basically was, he was wasting her time, and she basically told him, like, that he can't do that. So, and then at the end, just to prove my point a little bit more and how flippant he is with his responsibilities, after the hearing, he tweeted a photo of himself, tagging Representative Porter, saying, "Thanks for your part in today's hearing. Hope you like these Oreos." And Representative Porter is quoted as saying, "I was asking serious questions about serious problems that Americans are facing. The foreclosure rate continues to exist at FHA, and the foreclosure proceedings and processes have been bad for over 15 years, that I worked on the issue. I was coming in with a series of serious questions, and I was hoping to get serious answers."
Okay, so I just have a couple of comments on this. This is the problem with neoliberalism and the establishment system in which created an opening for an administration like Trump to come into power. This is why we need to have free and fair elections. This is why we need to really vet our candidates. This is why we got to get money out of politics. This is why we have to step up and get actively involved in this political system, especially for 2020. Because if we want to beat Trump, not impeach Trump, but if we really want to defeat President Trump and his administration, as well as neoliberals who want to, continue on with their 1% agenda, we're going to need people who are going to be going to do their job. The housing crisis is real, and we are long overdue for another economic collapse. If and when that happens, whether it's tomorrow or a few months from now, or either during the election cycle, it is a reality. And we have someone who is in power, who is in office right now, who doesn't know the difference between an Oreo and an Oreo, and was trying to make a joke about the whole thing.
And doesn't care.
And so I think for a final note,
I think I did more homework for this story than Ben Carson has done in his entire time as the HUD secretary. I would be willing to bet money on it.
I not only do I think you would make a lot of money off that, I think also there's something mentally wrong with Ben Carson.
He's just sleepy a lot, right?
Well,
do you think he's just on a lot of downers?
I don't know. Either that, or he wasn't really expecting to get this job, and he's just trying to wing it as best he can. But the consequences that all of us, the taxpayers, are going to be dealing with it, because this is a very severe threat. And if we don't have a strong, progressive, independent candidate that's going to take on President Trump and his administration, we're going to have this administration for another 4 years. I mean, let's face it. Everyone in the media thought that Trump wouldn't win in 2016. But it happened. And this is the consequence of when you have a neoliberal system and hand it over to an administration like Trump. You're going to get absolute power and no responsibility. Mm-hmm. All right, now moving on to a poll. And now this happened yesterday. It came out from the Hill. And, it's good news for Bernie Sanders right now because it's showing him gaining ground and surging against our good friend, sleepy, creepy Uncle Joe Biden.
Uncle Joe.
Good old Uncle Joe. And, of course, corporate media is going to try and cover this up and try and make it seem like, well, Bernie Sanders is not in the lead because Biden is in 40% of the polls. Young people like him. African Americans like him. Women like him. Everybody
Dogs
likes Biden.
love him.
Yeah, dogs, cats, everyone, goldfish. Everyone loves Biden. But now in this Iowa poll, it is showing Bernie Sanders as the main front runner in that poll. Now, of course, the Iowa polling, it's a key state. It's one of the first primaries. Then comes in New Hampshire, and this kind of gives me a little bit of hope that perhaps people are wising up to the fact of who sleepy, creepy Uncle Joe Biden is. And look, I got to give him this name because if you look at Biden's record as he challenged out Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you look at his record, he has gone on the record basically saying that he was he was anti-abortion. He was against desegregating schools. He was against busing. He helped write the mass incarceration bill. He was for, I guess, most of our military conflicts since the 90s all the way up until his time within the Obama administration. And as vice president in the Obama administration, he basically helped create a system in which would be inherited by President Trump. So people need to start getting informed about who's running to office and who's actually trying to get the nomination. And this time around, we're seeing at least Bernie Sanders at least come in the lead, especially in this Iowa poll. However, this is a cause of concern because now there will be some more media hit pieces against Bernie Sanders, as we've seen against Representative Tulsi Gabbard as well. But more importantly, we're going to see more fluff pieces for good old Joe Biden and any other neoliberal that's currently in the race. And this is why we also, more importantly, have to understand the voting laws and why we have to keep a clear, open eye on what happens not only during the debates, but during the first primary of this election cycle for the Democratic nomination. Be prepared for the establishment to commit election fraud. They did it in 2016. There was no investigation into it. They basically got a little slap on the wrist, and that's it. And I'm being generous with that. But going forward, there's still a small opening. Now, my co-host, Daniel Lupker, who's co-host with me on Saturday, he's right now manning a board, so huge shout out to Daniel. He would say, look, the establishment is a paper tiger with a paper wall defending it. All it requires really is for us to have enough push and momentum against it and watch it break. The establishment is just a bunch of cowards. They have money, but they don't have people power. And this is, again, where we have to talk to our friends and neighbors. And yes, even people who probably won't agree with you. But this poll right now is a glimmer of hope. But it's not enough. We as citizens have to step up. So, Kira, I kind of want to get your comments on this.
Yeah, this is a glimmer of hope. I just feel like the elections are so far away that any polling really that I see, I take with a grain of salt because I've seen things turn around so fast in so many ways. And in fact, if you remember, in the primary last time in Iowa, Bernie Sanders lost by an eyelash. I can't remember how much it was actually by.
It was a hair thin.
It was a very slim margin, and so I'm not surprised that Bernie Sanders is taking the lead in Iowa. I'm actually from Iowa originally, and really? So I canvassed in Iowa for Bernie Sanders during his last primary. And you'd be really surprised. There were a lot of people who were very staunch Bernie Sanders, very staunch Trump supporters too. So what I'm seeing a lot of, and I think that everybody's seeing a lot of, is a shift toward populism in some form of populism, really, because I think that we've already had a dress rehearsal around all of this, and now it's time for the actual show. And I think people are really attuned to it. But I'm not going to keep my hopes up for now because so much can happen with 24 different primary candidates that it's just so up in the air. And right now, all we do know is that Biden has the most name recognition because he's riding the Obama wave. And Bernie, of course, makes sense. Because as it stands right now, we are so far away from actually seeing what there is. And with Iowa having their caucus be so close to the Clinton-Sanders vote last time, like I said, I'm not horribly surprised that it looks marginal this time.
Mm-hmm. So now going forward with, was looking at this analysis from Bernie Sanders and how he's gaining some momentum, I think for a final note, and what we really need to take away from this election cycle and how it's going to end is that it's going to require involvement. And I think a lot of people are still a little bit jaded with what happened during 2016, but we have to have the ability to understand that if we don't take power, this neoliberal system will continue on. And we could get a potential another 4 years of President Trump. I mean, it can happen. It could happen. And
Yes.
It's a reality that we have to accept, however frightening it is. The only people that can really bring in change is us. And that's how we're going to bring in real change. So with that being said, now there's a story that's happening across the sea in Austria. So what's going on?
Yeah, talking about bringing in real change and patterns that are going around worldwide with Brexit and the Trump administration here in the United States. There's actually a really interesting happening in Austria. Austria's vice chancellor and Freedom Party's leader Heinz Christian Strache was forced to resign at the weekend after a video sting that occurred on Friday. The scandal broke when footage from 2017 was published in German media showing Mr. Strache and another FPO, Freedom Party official, proposing to offer government contracts to a supposed Russian oligarch's niece. Mr. Strache resigned the next day. And Mr. Kurz, who's the head of the center-right People's Party, said new elections would have to now be held. The resigning Freedom Party ministers include the foreign minister, the ministers for defense, transport, and social affairs, and the FPO made up half of the country's cabinet. So basically their entire cabinet right now in Austria is eroding. Just a little backstory, because if you're anything like me, you knew absolutely nothing about Austria's government and their party systems. And so I did just a little bit of research, and it looks like the Freedom Party was founded in 1956 as an anti-socialist and started to veer toward right-wing popularism in 1986. By 1999, the Freedom Party placed second and came in ahead of Austria's People Party for the first time by a small margin. So the Austria's People Party is actually the right-wing party of Austria. And so the Freedom Party is the way right-wing
Holy cow.
of the party, okay? So, for example, you want to think like, conservatives, which, I mean, I know right now in the U.S. the conservatives are way right-wing. But, as compared to the Tea Party people, I was like, who are the don't tread on me people? Yeah, so you want to think about like the Tea Partiers versus, your regular Republican. So, that's who the Austria People's Party is. And so they actually, by a small margin for the first time, came in second place in 1999. Now, they decided to do a coalition agreement so that they could have more party on the right wing, which proved to be a bad idea for the Austrian People Party now that all of this corruption is coming up to the surface, because now they look really bad because they decided to get in bed with these like really naughty right-wingers. So by 2005, the OVP, which is the Austria People's Party, forced FPO out, the Freedom Party, out due to internal disagreements.
Yeah, I wonder what happened.
I know, right? Well, it mentions later in the article, like, we've had some disagreements in the past, but there aren't exactly, coming out in this article what those disagreements might have been. But in 2005 to 2019, the Freedom Party's popularity has increased substantially. So that's kind of the history of the parties there. And right now it's not really known who recorded the video published on Friday. Neither is it clear who actually set up the meeting, which allegedly took place at a villa on the Spanish island of Ibiza in July of 2017, before the Freedom Party joined the new government. Okay. The video shows Mr. Strache and Johann Gudenis, another FPO politician, relaxing on sofas, drinking and talking to a woman who claims to be a wealthy Russian national looking to invest in Austria. So that was the scandal. And in the footage, the woman offers to buy a 50% stake in Austria's Kronen Zeitung, which is the country's largest circulation tabloid. So she was going to buy 50% stake in that tabloid newspaper and switch its editorial position to support the Freedom Party. And so in exchange, Mr. Strache said he could award her public contracts.
Wow.
And he's heard saying in the video, if you take over the Kronen Zeitung 3 weeks before the election and get us into first place, then we can talk about everything.
Well, dude, you think these conservatives, especially these fascists, would be fiscally conservative and stop corruption because they've always been on record. Wait a minute. No, they haven't. This is ridiculous. I'm so glad this video is out there, but it goes to show you that this right-wing, extremism, and this is extreme, like close to fascism, which is something that led to a crisis. I don't know if you guys remember or not. It's called World War II, where these guys, the Nazis, invaded every single country.
Never heard of them.
Never heard of them. Yeah, but it's again, whoever leaked that video out, whoever had the courage to do so, is a hero, and at least now you get the ugly face of these politicians is now revealed. And the people in Austria now at least know who and what these guys stand for and what they're all about. And again, to really stop something like this, especially of such extremism and corruption, because neoliberalism isn't just a problem here in the United States. It's an international problem. You have corruption on every single level in every single country. You're not going to point to me and show me a country that's not corrupt. Even if there are countries that are least corrupt than us, there's still levels of corruption, and you still have horrible people that are in office, that are either prime ministers, in parliament, in a senate, or in the house, or a governor, or a president, you name it. And this is why we need to have a real strong, not only here in the United States, a strong force of state, independent media, but an international independent media to hold all our politicians and those in power accountable. Look, we as citizens have gone through a long and hard road to get to at least have some form of representation in our government. And this is an international thing. So we have to step up, get involved, and start leading the way. If we don't, we're just going to basically turn a blind eye to these politicians. So, Now, moving on to a story that's basically here in our own backyard. It's in the city of Chicago. Now, we have a show called Chicago Corner. It premieres every Sunday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. So to our viewers on Mi Casa Tu Casa, that's when we have a show that's dedicated only to Chicago stories, Illinois stories. And we're going to talk about a problem that the entire country is going to have. We lived with him for 8 years. Rahm Emanuel is no longer our mayor, but guess what? You're going to see him in your TVs. You're going to hear him on your radio. You're going to see him on cable news.
Dreams do come true.
Yeah, you're going to see him in the newspapers. And never forget, way back in 2016, during the March primary here in Illinois, Hillary Clinton said that Rahm Emanuel is doing a good job. Well, let me tell you guys what kind of good job he did and what kind of problem it's going to pose for the rest of the country. Because remember, this is the same guy who told progressives to shut it up.
Yeah.
Quit complaining. This is the guy who...
I think he called us libtards, too. Wasn't this the guy that called us that?
Yeah, this is our guy who's all friends and jokes and a swell good time. So, right now, as it currently stands, Rahm Emanuel is no longer the mayor of the city of Chicago. He was replaced by now, no longer mayor-elect, but Mayor Lori Lightfoot. So she's got a big mess to clean up. So already he's been shopping around to he's meeting with the executives at CNN and MSNBC, two bastions of progressive independent media. No, they're establishment media. And right now he's also basically talking to party leaders as well, Democratic establishment party leaders. And he's doing a thing called Drive for what I call triangulation. And basically this is a term in which he used this discredited strategy under the Clinton administration, pursued a punitive welfare reform, mandatory minimum sentences in order to win over Republican voters. He also famously told grassroots activists to take a chill pill following Trump's election. Right now, he's this new side gig that he's trying to do, especially to get on CNN and MSNBC, is that he's going to tell everyone that Democrats need to worry about 21st century progressivism. They need to worry about the perils of socialism and democratic socialism. He's also writing a book. And if I ever see this book, I'm probably going to take it to a dog park and tell the dogs to have at it. And the title of the book, get this, hold your laughter in. Why Mayors Rule the World. He literally, somebody convinced him to write a book.
Just don't buy the book. Get it out of one of those little free libraries that they have in the neighborhoods. You don't want to help his book sales.
No, or either that. Just, you know what? With somebody here's your homework, internet. Someone should just, find a PDF of that book, and everyone should be citing on how much full of crap our former mayor really is. And so let me tell you guys about the real truth about Mayor Rahm Emanuel and what he's done in this city. He has devastated the city for 8 years with neoliberal policies affecting the South and West Side communities, mostly predominantly African-American Latino communities. Under his administration, half of the mental health facilities have been shut down. So on the South Side, which had about 0.17% licensed mental health clinics per 1,000 residents, most of those were shut down under his administration. Shootings began to skyrocket, and there wasn't enough places in which people could get mental health services. There was a lot more violence. There wasn't enough to help assistance survivors of trauma. And he basically turned a blind eye to this. And when people would protest and call him out on this, he would ignore them. He would walk away. In fact, if you roll back to some of our earlier coverage on our radio show, we would have a running statement. Rahm Emanuel would heroically walk away. He would walk away from protesters, from people challenging him, from activists challenging him. And he would walk away. He would never say a word. But let me tell you about another thing that he's allowed to happen in this fair city of ours. We've talked about Flint, Michigan, and how there's lead in their drinking water. Well, Chicago is a major metropolitan drinking water, and about 30% of the city's homes is now affected with lead due to this administration basically getting rid of the Department of Environment. Basically, he told that all the other departments should be their own individual EPAs. So during his 8 years, hazardous material inspections fell more than by 90% between 2010 and 2018. Air quality inspections plunged by 70%. Solid waste inspections dropped more by than 60%. Homeowners were facing water shutoffs. And there was also the fact that homeowners were also dealing with raw sewage getting into their basements. And more importantly, anytime people would bring up the lead that's in Chicago's drinking water, his former ally, good old friend O'Connor from the 40th Ward, would block and prevent any kind of policies or discussions about lead in Chicago's drinking water. Well, good news is that O'Connor has been defeated. He's now replaced by Democratic Socialist and Progressive Andre Vasquez. We've interviewed him in the past. And right now, as it currently stands, and this is some good news, at least before I get into some more bad news about Rahm Emanuel, is that our new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, is basically making up plans of reestablishing the Chicago Environmental EPA. But in other words, we do have a few other things to deal with too. Under his administration, 54 Chicago public schools have been shut down. Students and teachers have been witnessing a decline in resources under his administration. Another concern that's been happening is that has been a huge corruption with a lot of more importantly, there's been a lot of corruption with the charter schools that have been getting a lot of grants and programs. And more importantly too, we're also seeing a huge disparity in which public schools are being denied more resources. Now, under this new administration, there is a chance in which they can get, more resources. But here's the problem: it has to deal with Rahm Emanuel dealing with the TIF funds. He's able to find money for DePaul University to have a brand new basketball arena. But whenever time teachers or students would bring up the fact that you have money for this university, but you don't have money for our own public schools, again, he would just turn a blind eye to it. And if you look at our Facebook page as well, we did a coverage way back in the winter of 2018. It was in Inglewood. There was a whole bunch of community leaders, students, teachers, all there speaking out, defending their schools from being shut down. And this one student in particular stood up and said, if these schools are so bad, if these schools are so terrible, why is everyone in this room fighting to keep it open? Just a side note, anyone who was in the Chicago, with the administration for Chicago Public Schools were appointed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel. The public had no say in who got appointed. Mm-hmm. And again, 54 Chicago Public Schools were shut down. There was also a huge housing crisis here too. Gentrification is running amok all across the city. You had people being displaced in Pilsen, for example. 10,000 people have been displaced. You have large real estate developers moving into communities, basically raising up the rents, shutting down schools. And this housing crisis has led to mass exodus of people leaving the city of Chicago. And this is the work that Rahm Emanuel has done. This is the garbage that Rahm Emanuel has done. This is what he has done for a long time. And this is what happens when you have a neoliberal run your city for 8 years. But yet now he has the audacity to go in front of CNN and MSNBC and all these other media outlets and basically say, hey, Democrats, listen to me. People of the world, listen to me, because progressives and socialists and democratic socialists and independents are a danger. Yeah. Sorry for the bad news, everyone, but you're going to get Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Kira.
I was wondering how you were going to get through all of the foils of Rahm Emanuel in the however many minutes we have to do our segments, because as I was reading through this, I knew a lot of it, but wow, I'm pretty amazed, and it's really clear to me that Rahm Emanuel is kind of the poster child for crony capitalism.
Oh, do you really want to know what else he did? He was bending over backwards to give Amazon. Remember when Amazon was doing the city search for the
I wasn't even thinking about that.
For the second headquarters? He was going to make them pay zero in taxes. Do you want to know who would be paying for that ridiculous zero in taxes for Amazon? We would. The entire city of Chicago would be paying out of the nose for that. But he said he would, no, don't worry. I'll explain the details later. And again, this is the guy who's going to go on corporate media and tell us to beware of progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, then he's perfect for corporate media, you see?
Yeah, but I don't want people to really watch him on the TV.
No one watches TV.
Yeah, but you know what's great, though, is that all of you get to at least know who Rahm Emanuel is. And if you really want to know the real situation in Chicago, I'm just going to give a huge shout out to this person. Tom Tresher wrote the book, Chicago's Not Broke.
It's so good.
And it's a book that explains the TIF fund. So if you don't know anything about Chicago, the book is called Chicago is Not Broke, written by Tom Tresher. I recommend it. But Kira, I want to give you some final note for the story.
Yeah, that book's incredible. It really schooled me a lot on how Chicago brings in its money and how we're spending our money. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about having hope in the Democratic primaries, and my lack of hope right now because they're so far away. But really, what we can really see right now is that there's a lot of hope for the city of Chicago and the leadership in Chicago. You were saying just a little bit ago, Kit, that Patrick O'Connor, a 36-year incumbent, was actually taken out of office. Well, that happened across the city. I think they said 6 different socialist candidates were actually elected onto city council, and then of course Lori Lightfoot as our mayor. So I do think that we have things to look forward to, and I also, just hearkening back to something that you were saying earlier about the Democratic primary, is it's really our job as Chicagoans to hold our politicians' feet to the fire.
Even this brand new city council and this new mayor too.
And regardless of their promises, regardless of how great they seemed, regardless of all of that, ultimately what we have to understand is that these positions of power will ultimately corrupt people. I have it that there are very few people in the world that are not corruptible. I know I am. I'll say it. I really think that as long as we keep that in the forefront, because what we see a lot of the times is we get our candidate in and then everybody goes to sleep.
And you can't afford sleep in this day and age. And the thing is that if we don't step up now, we're going to have the same system again. This goes more importantly
100%.
Yeah, to people in Chicago. But I do have a special treat for all of you, though. And this is a video. Now, Heartlands Media, we've done a lot of investigative work in the past, and this is when we covered the 3rd town hall in Chicago during the mayoral election runoff. We actually did even this is a collage interview with some of the different mayoral candidates, including our new mayor Lori Lightfoot. And this was before Rahm Emanuel made his announcement that he wasn't going to run. And mind you, everyone is there, pleading, making their case about why they should be mayor. But one person's missing. I will have all of you decide who is missing and why they are missing. Enjoy, guys.
On July 25, 2018, a mayoral candidate forum was held at Horner Park on Chicago's north side of the city. 9 candidates showed, except for one.
Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Yet again, Mayor Rahm Emanuel is not here. Again, he's not really participating in any of these forums or debates, as well as previous other forums. What kind of statement do you want to make? What is your response for Mayor Emanuel's lack of participating in these forums and debates?
This debate here? Yeah. Well, if I had been in his shoes, I wouldn't have came either. Because he's not like.
Well, he's not participating because he doesn't have a good story to tell, and he tries to avoid any any opportunity to appear somewhere where he could possibly get booed.
Look, I think his absence from this incredibly important conversation that's happening all over the city speaks volumes about what he cares about and what he doesn't care about.
He's not going to do anything he's not forced to do. That's the nature of the man.
I mean, it fits his pattern. I mean, what's my statement on his lack of participation in any democratic exercise?
Well, I have nothing to say to the mayor. I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do.
I mean, I don't have anything to say. He's the incumbent. He has the right to. He's going to definitely have to be a part of it once we're on the ballot.
I think it's really inappropriate for him to not participate in these forums.
I think it's something that people should be aware of, in the sense of you have candidates out there putting themselves out. We're going to say things that might be agreed upon or might not be agreed upon, but we have to convey our message to the citizens of Chicago. And if somebody's not willing to do that, then they shouldn't be eligible to run for mayor.
If you want to be the mayor of this great city, you've got to get out there, you've got to meet people, you've got to listen to them, and you've got to demonstrate a level of compassion and empathy for the day-to-day struggles of everyday Chicagoans. And the fact that he won't come out in public in these kinds of forums and interact with the citizens, to me, is disqualifying.
He gets the office, he does his PR, he has very controlled press events. If it's not controlled, he's not there. He's never going to show up to something like this. He needs it controlled. He needs it staged. He needs paid applauders.
But once the debates happen, I think we'll be able to expose Rahm for who he is.
For him, for as I'm concerned, for Rahm Emanuel, close up 48 or 50 schools. Close down the Mental Health Institute. Okay? Economic equality is not there in fairness. I would, look, something wrong with him mentally. You gotta have something wrong with you, serious wrong with you mentally. I'm not for sure. I think he need to be in that.
All right, guys. Your plug's still in. So it really took a lot out of me to not laugh, because that Willie Wilson interview was hilarious. I mean, and even during the debates too, Willie Wilson is most famous for saying about, in regards to cannabis legalization, he said about cannabis, everybody's smoking it anyways. Might as well legalize it. So yeah, as soon as he said there's something wrong with him, like, it took a lot out of me just not to just crack up.
Something wrong with him mentally.
But you know what? He's probably right, because. But again, this is how crazy that election cycle was. There was 22 people running for the office of Chicago mayor. Very similar to what's happening with this presidential election cycle. But
I think it's called narcissism, by the way. What's going on with him mentally?
Yeah. Well, and
I'm not a therapist or anything, but
yeah. And one last final note again, to our entire audience on the Mi Casa Su Casa YouTube channel, on a Harlan's Media YouTube channel, Rahm Emanuel's going to be on our national cable news. He's courting CNN and MSNBC, so get ready to see more of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, but learn the truth about him. So now we got to move on to a story about town loses workforce after immigration crackdown. So, Kira, what's happening here?
Yeah, okay. So this is, again, from not my hometown, but my home state of Iowa. Business owners in a small town in Iowa are struggling to stay in business due to sweeping immigration crackdowns across the state. So Mount Pleasant is in Henry County, Iowa, where there is a 2.3% unemployment rate. And this rate is so low that employers are actually struggling to fill 300 open jobs. One small business owner said that it's so hard to get people in the door just to sit down and interview, and you're so afraid you're going to scare them off. Any little thing you do, they won't show up for their first day of work. Like a lot of business owners in Iowa, these business owners are, saying that the one solution to chronic labor shortage is to encourage more outsiders to come to the state, and that actually includes immigrants. So this is a controversial position throughout Iowa, where the state has passed legislation aimed at discouraging illegal immigration. It also is home to some of the most vociferous critics of illegal immigration, including Republican Representative Steve King. So Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa signed a bill that will have Iowa cities and counties who violate federal immigration law cut state funding to counties and cities that are violating federal immigration law. So basically, this whole idea of sanctuary cities is being taken away from, that opportunity is being taken away from any counties in Iowa.
Okay.
And the threat being that they will take away state funding from those counties and cities if they don't uphold federal immigration law. So that's what's happening. And cities and counties across Iowa are seeing these being, these laws being put into effect by basically officials showing up and taking workers away from, literally taking workers away from their job. In one story, they talked about, federal immigration agents sweeping into the precast concrete plant in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and arresting 32 men who were working there.
Okay, so here's the thing.
Wow.
So here's the thing. You got to remember that immigrants do pay into our system. They do help pay and keep Social Security afloat. They do pay taxes. And
it looks like $11.6 billion a year in taxes is what undocumented immigrants are bringing into our tax system.
Right. And so now that we look at this, why are we implementing policies that are going to shoot us ourselves in the foot? See, the thing is that you have these politicians now passing these policies and basically making people afraid of the other, making people afraid of the unknown. Well, let's just remember that in life, you're always going to run to people that are different than you. You're always going to run to situations and environments that are different. But that's human life. That's human nature. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. And we got to accept the fact that, we're going to live in a very diverse world. And passing policies that are regressive and harming people will only hurt you in the end. And now you have this community that's suffering because the workforce is gone. And if there's no workforce, how is a community supposed to survive? How is a community supposed to get back on its feet if people are just afraid to go to work because they know that in this said city or district or state, because of where they're from, they're going to go to jail.
Yeah, and all this talk that Republicans
it's
have
terrible.
about helping small business owners, you see it time and again that is just absolutely not the case. Small business owners are not being helped by, legislation like this. Workers are getting taken away. And Iowans say they don't really have a problem with people coming into Iowa from other countries. They just don't like illegal immigration. And they suggest that businesses pay more to lure native Iowans into the workforce. But a lot of business leaders are also really worried that voices like their Representative King's sends messages that keep people away. So there's this tug of war going on between people who are trying to hire labor and people who are very freaked out by the other, and just to buttress your point, Kit, about the perks of having immigrants. Outside of just the amazing amounts of diversity that it brings into our country. And with diversity brings so much creativity and so much capital.
Yeah,
it really truly does.
And there's a thing before I let you say. There's something that we need to remember is that we don't know where the next great innovator is going to be at, the next great doctor or political leader or lawyer or scientist. We don't know where these minds are going to come from. And the thing is, in America's history, some of our best minds came from people who immigrated from their country, came here, had an idea, used it, and the country benefited from it. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, again, because of stupid, regressive policies to make people afraid, to keep those in power. But at the end of the day, it doesn't help. So, Kira.
Yeah, when we say that this country is built on immigration, it's not just lip service. It literally was. And it still is built upon immigration. And what we're really doing is slowing down our economy by not allowing these immigrants to go to work. Immigrants, actually, one of the things that I found was immigrants don't actually take American jobs. Because immigrants tend to come in with less education and they're willing to do the jobs that a lot of Americans who actually have a high school diploma don't necessarily, and we're not talking like bachelor's degrees. We're not talking even associate's degrees. I think it's 26% of immigrants that come into the United States don't even have a high school degree. So these folks are working in dangerous jobs. They're working in jobs where they're picking fruit. They're working in these concrete factories. So there are a lot of jobs out there that Americans just aren't taking up. And maybe it is because wages are low, but then that just brings me to the conversation for raising the minimum wage. I mean, there's there you go. If people are having an issue with business owners paying their labor cheaper, then there's a way to go about taking care of that issue as well. Another thing that immigrants do for our economy is they actually populate our population. And what I mean by that is not only by immigrating into the country is our country growing, but also the children that they're having. Right now, one of the stories that I actually almost brought up for today's show was that our birth rate here in America is at an all-time low.
Well, yeah, I wonder what's leading to that. Environmental issues, student debt, housing crisis, lack of jobs.
Who knows? But I mean, those are just stabs in the dark, right?
Right.
It's probably all those feminists and that birth control and abortion, right?
Who knows?
So more people are in the economy as a result of immigration, and more people means more money. And the reason for that is, like we mentioned before, $11.6 billion a year from immigrants who are not actually taking money out of the system either. So it's literally like pure profit for our government. So, but it also means that more services are going to be in need when we have a bigger population. So that does mean more jobs. That does mean higher paid jobs in a lot of ways, and also a lot of opportunity for small businesses, because children of immigrants tend to start small businesses and work harder than Americans.
I think one other note too we got to take away from this is that, look, immigrants are people too. They're human beings just like us, have their own same fears and wants and dreams and everything else. But how you treat a person is how you're going to get treated back. And the United States and how it treats immigrants is, well, horrific. It's stagnant. This isn't what the bastion of what freedom's supposed to be like. And look, I remember when myself and Daniel covered a story last summer at the Gary Chicago International Airport. It's an airport in the middle of nowhere. And the purpose of this airport is where it basically takes detained immigrants who, mind you, did non-violent offenses, and they're chained up like animals, forced to crawl up onto the airplane. And this facility basically deports people, 3 busloads, who are in the Michigan state area, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Kentucky. And who wants to be treated like that? And then you could see why people are leaving these said towns and communities and even the country as a whole, because it's no longer really safe or even affordable to even continue living here. And is that the message we want to tell the international community? Come to America? Oh, wait, but you have to meet X, Y, and Z before we can let you in.
But we'll never let you succeed.
Yeah, it's backwards. And this is why we have to get involved during this presidential election cycle, because if we don't, we're going to see more policies like this, but we're also going to see a decrease in our population too, a decrease in our workforce, and a lack of real respect of coming to this country in order to build yourself up. Like I said before, some of our best creative minds came from immigrants or were descended from an immigrant family.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
and just as a capper to this story, many of the men that were arrested at the Midwest Precast Concrete are remaining in the area, and they're waiting for their deportation hearings. They're caught in a bit of a catch-22 right now, because if they return to their home countries before the hearings, they forfeit their bonds and are considered felons under U.S. law. But because they're not allowed to work legally, they have no way of supporting themselves. So they're getting by with the help of local churches and pro-immigration groups.
All right. So now, moving on to a much more positive story. We all know Walmart and the Waltons and how they're really, really, really rich, and they're making a lot of money, and they're workers at the end of the day. Basically, what Walmart tells them to do is that they have to, talk to the government about getting, unemployment or food stamps and all that other good stuff. So basically, the workers are working slave wages, and
we're subsidizing them.
Oh yes, of course, we are paying for that. But as it stands right now, Senator Bernie Sanders will attend Walmart's annual meeting to push for higher pay and other labor reforms. So, Senator Bernie Sanders is right now going to go to Arkansas next month. Campaign spokesman said he will push to boost pay and benefits for workers and introduce a measure to give hourly employees a spot on Walmart's board. If hourly workers at Walmart were well represented on its board, I doubt you would see the CEO of Walmart making over 1,000 times more than its average worker. And then there's in a statement from Walmart said it will respond to specific shareholder proposals once they are formatted and presented at the June 5th meeting. If Senator Sanders attends, we hope he will approach his visit not as a campaign stop, but a constructive opportunity to learn about the many ways we're providing to increase economic opportunity, mobility, and benefits to our associates, as well as our widely recognized leadership on environmental sustainability. Wow, that's a bold statement coming from Walmart, looking at their past track record and how they treat employees and how they have zero benefits. So I do hope Senator Bernie Sanders actually goes there as his campaign, be aggressive, and actually fight for those workers, because it's something he has been consistent on. Okay, so just so you guys get a short idea who Walmart is, in case you don't know, but of course you guys probably do. Walmart is the largest U.S. retailer. It is apparently set to raise the wage of its workers to $15 an hour. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a bill last year aiming to push the company to raise its workers' pay. The senator cited the Walton family relatives of founder Sam Walton, who own half of the company's shares, as evidence of a rigged economy and the need to raise taxes on the super wealthy. So I find this really great that Senator Bernie Sanders is doing this. It's what's going to separate him from the other candidates. And most importantly, I'm just kind of thinking back in the past. I remember Clinton was on a board.
Oh, that's right.
Walmart, yeah. And I do believe that, she had, and this was many years ago, even before she ran for senator, she had an opportunity to maybe, propose some progressive policies, maybe benefits for workers, higher wages, make sure they're represented. Wait, did she do that? No, I don't think she did. Did she?
No, not that I remember, actually.
Okay, so Kira, I want to get your comments on this.
She had all that opportunity to do so. That's weird.
Yeah, no money, no support, no nothing.
Yeah, this is what I love about Bernie Sanders. I mean, he just makes everything his business, and that's what I'm all about, right? So, we've been hearing about Walmart taking advantage of their workers for a long time, right. For as long as I've been paying attention to what Walmart's been up to, and that's been many, many years. And so not only are we seeing these workers who are having a hard time just making ends meet, they're working full time, they're not making a living wage, but then we also see ourselves as a people, as a government, subsidizing this kind of behavior and not calling out Walmart for what they're doing, because it's criminal. It really, truly is. And I'm just really grateful that we have politicians now that are speaking out. I mean, we've always had politicians that are speaking out, but now they're getting the airtime, whether it be from the media or just internet independent media sources, because it's important to bring these stories to the forefront and really reveal how the mega rich stay that way and keep the vast majority of the population down.
Here's my question to you, Kira.
What's up?
And I kind of want to get your comments on this one. How do you think the corporate media will spin this? Because Walmart has a shared ad revenue space on CNN and MSNBC and ABC and CBS. We see their commercials on television, on radio, in the papers, especially in traditional establishment media. How do you think corporate media is going to spin this? And how do you think the other candidates, especially people like good old sleepy, creepy Uncle Joe, Bet on My Stork, Pete Buttigieg, however you want to pronounce it, Kamala the Cop, and Cory Booker, how do you think these candidates are going to respond to something like this?
Okay, so there are a couple ways that I think the mainstream media is going to be responding. One of the ways is they'll say that they're meddling in the freedom of Walmart to do business. I hear that a lot, especially from libertarian camps, but mostly any sort of regulation on any sort of business is infringing on the freedom of the business. And so that is one big way that they'll go ahead and spin this. Another way is they'll somehow blame the workers, and they're really good at doing that. They'll say the workers are lazy, or maybe they need to get another job, because this is how you make it in America. So it'll be one of those two ways, if not a conglomeration of both. They'll say the workers are lazy, or they'll say that we're meddling in the freedom of a private corporation. As for the other candidates, what I would assume with that is they'll make it more of a minimum wage issue.
Right.
Because they're not going to come straight out and say, like, rah, rah, Walmart. Hillary Clinton already kind of showed us what's going to happen if you do that. But,
right.
I think what they'll do is they'll make it more of a minimum wage conversation than hey, this corporation has been taking advantage of not only their own workers for a really long time, but also our government and how we work. And we've been subsidizing them instead of going that direction, because, we know that all these people are at cocktail hours together. They're all rubbing elbows. They're all buddies and friends. And so they're not going to go after their friends. They're going to go after, something like a minimum wage law, which would be great. I would be okay with that. And I do think that there's a bigger conversation here.
Right. I think at the end of the day, though, I think this is a potential boon for Senator Bernie Sanders. Is a chance for him to, gain some traction. But I can see the headlines, especially from CNN, MSNBC, and including Fox News, too, where they're saying that he is a socialist. He's imposing on capitalistic freedom. And you might hear some candidates say, like, yes, there should be a rise in the minimum wage, but at the end of the day, let's look at who is very clear with consistent with policies, and that is Senator Bernie Sanders. And I would also say to some extent too, Tulsi Gabbard would probably go on the record saying, like, yeah, raise the wages too. Mm-hmm. That was one of her talking points on campaign trail. Like, look, you have people working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and if people don't have enough money to pay the bills or take care of themselves, how are you going to live the American dream? I mean, you have these corporations making billions of dollars in profit, but yet their workers get nothing in the end. And it's a rigged system, a rigged economy. And let's see how Senator Bernie Sanders handles his meeting with Walmart and the executives and the shareholders. And hopefully he brings in a lot of people there to support him.
And maybe they'll show him what a contribution they are to the community.
Yeah, because they are members of a community. So there we go. So now moving on to another story. And, this has to deal with Alabama.
Been in the news a lot lately.
Yeah, and Alabama recently passed a very pro-life piece of legislation. However, recent reports have indicated with some of their prisons that a lot of prisoners are dying in their prison system.
That's not pro-life.
Well, wait a minute. Hold on, Kira. What's going on?
Well, the U.S. Department of Justice has put the pro-life state of Alabama on notice to fix dangerous and deadly prison conditions or face a lawsuit that could result in a federal takeover of the prison system. Federal investigators found that Alabama routinely violates the constitutional rights of prisoners by failing to protect them from prisoner-on-prisoner attacks and sexual abuse. It cites cases of inmate deaths, rapes, and extortion of the families of prisoners. And so far this year, there have been 8 homicides and 8 suicides inside of Alabama's prisons. So just a couple of cases that were brought up in this particular story that I found. In one case, a 33-year-old Ryan Rust was found dead in his solitary cell at Alabama's Holman Prison with a belt around his neck and one side of it tied to the bar of the window. He had hung himself. And his sister says that basically the conditions in the prison were completely unbearable. He couldn't get medical treatment for months after one of the inmates hit him in the head with a metal lock wrapped in a sock.
Ouch.
She says, quote, almost a year of spinal fluid leaking out of his ear. He was stabbed so many times, he was cut with a box blade from his shoulder blade down his back, and that took 11 stitches. In another case, one woman experienced just how corrupt the system is when her son, who had autism and an IQ of 63, was imprisoned on a 3rd-degree burglary charge. She says, quote, I was sitting at home one night and had a phone call, and it was a guard calling me, telling me that if I didn't put $270 on his books, he'd be dead in 30 minutes. So,
holy God.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, no.
On his books meant going online to, this is crazy. Meant going online to add money to an inmate's commissary or phone accounts. The calls continued for years, and she said she paid nearly $9,000 in extortion.
Oh my God.
Her complaints to the warden were never answered. So those are just a few of the cases. Alabama's prison system is in crisis in part due to overcrowding and severe understaffing. For example, the warden at Alabama's death row prison reported to federal investigators that she has 11 security staff shifts for a prison population of 800. And the prison itself is actually at 164% its capacity. So they are crowded. Back in the 1970s, the state's prisons were under federal control because of the same issue. And in 40 years since then, Alabama has been forced by the courts to resolve a number of issues, including a lack of mental health and medical care, and women's prisons where male guards were sexually abusing female inmates and using hitching posts and chain gangs to control inmates.
Okay. Well, how dare the legislation in the state of Alabama pass pro-life laws when they're going to just basically allow people to still die anyways? Yeah, you care about the life of a fetus, but when a person's born, hey, screw them, right?
Not even the life of a fetus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a life of like this like little glom of
It's
cells.
a glom of cells. It's not even alive yet. It's not even a human being yet, okay? But as for a living human being, and look, I'm not saying prison should be a place where you rehabilitate somebody to reintroduce them into society, but the way our prison industrial complex is, it's for free slave labor.
Yeah.
And you have people in jail. Majority of the jail population is you have to look at different states will vary, but some of the mental health facilities are gone, so they're going to put people with mental health issues in jail, which is only going to make them worse.
Mm-hmm.
Another group of population that's being targeted is African American Latinos, which again it's because of racism and really horrible economic laws that are being passed all across this country. And then finally, remember, a majority of the population too is also victims of this ridiculous war on drugs. And this is what happens when you have prohibition. You have overcrowding prisons. And the prison industrial complex buys off legislators at the state and federal level to make sure that there are more prisons being built in schools. They have more prisons so they can arrest more people, to have more free slave labor. And hearing these stories, you know, you're supposed to think that we live in a society of rules and laws and regulations, but in reality, when you take off the mask, you see a disgusting husk of whatever we have here that's riddled to the core of corruption and inept leadership. So is there anything that the families are doing right now to really get, like, I guess, some kind of justice for their relatives that are still behind bars, their friends that are still behind bars? I mean, because hearing that story of the mother where she's basically being extorted by a security guard, someone who's with law enforcement, you would think that there would be more investigation into this.
Well, there's been a lot of investigation as of recent, and the Justice Department found evidence that officials at the Alabama Department of Corrections are deliberately indifferent to the risk of harm and either unable or unwilling to deal with the issues. So the federal deadline to actually make all of the corrections for the Department of Corrections is this week. And so it's implementing some federal recommendations and taking measures to improve, including the creation of an inspector general and a corruption task force, and hiring a new deputy commissioner to run things after the previous one was ousted for misconduct. Surprise. So with new money from the legislature for pay and training initiatives, an aggressive recruitment campaign is actually underway right now. And I'm not really sure how much any of these efforts are going to help, because a lot of what I've been finding is basically that a large percentage of the population is not interested in caring about or knowing about what happens with the prison population. A lot of people see prisoners as being dangerous, menaces to society, or people that just need to be locked up and punished in a very punitive sense rather than a rehabilitative sense. And so right now they're just doing what they can to hire more officers, but really what it's looking like is they're not going to catch up in time for this deadline. And despite it's a Wednesday deadline, so it's actually looks like today. There's talk of a special session later this summer, but there appears to be no sense of urgency, rather a resignation that the legislative process will just have to play out.
Okay, so real quick, I want to give 2 shouts on the different chats right now. So Jane Kelton, you said this, they need to stop calling them pro-life. They're anti-abortion, period. In another one said on the chat too, let me get this correct, was Teresa 78201. I'm with you, changing the vocabulary here. Absolutely, we do got to change the vocabulary. I think you're absolutely correct. They are anti-abortion, they're not pro-life, and it's how to even treat living human beings. It goes to show you that they're never going to be pro-life. So that's a good correction right there. And then also in the Mikasa Sukasa chat, there's talk about how Michael Jordan is also invested into private prison industrial complex.
Oh,
yes.
That's an interesting little piece.
Yeah, that is a very interesting little piece. And again, like, there's a lot of states where, one person here in the Mikasa Sukasa chat, Edward Klein, some states in America are like living in Saudi Arabia. You know what? You're right, guys. And so here's what we have to do. We have to remember that we have to be involved in different political elections. We have to get involved with our politics at the state level, city level, county level, and at the federal level. Gone are the days where we used to joke and say, well, this is why I don't vote. This is why I don't get involved. As soon as you say, I'm not going to participate, you are basically relinquishing your power. And the thing is, right now, we have to take back our power. We have to take back the power so that we can have people in office actually doing humane things, actually passing really progressive, independent legislation that will break this neoliberal system that we have. Again, if we don't step up, you're going to see more stories like this. And granted, look, the individuals behind bars, they're people too. They're human beings too. And when they get out of jail, they have to reintegrate into society. But if they're under such nightmarish conditions, it's no wonder there's such people get rearrested again, or you see people incapable of integrating into society again. We have to remember that they are people, even the nonviolent offenders. If we don't look after each other, we're all going to fall.
Yeah, and I can see a big overhauling of the prison system coming in the future as long as we get the right legislators in place right now. One of the reasons I'm always figuring that's the case is because it's impacting so many people at this point, because all of our prisons are so overpopulated. People are being arrested and imprisoned for so many different things. I mean, 164% its capacity is outrageous. That now what we're seeing is that prisoners are, and prison life is affecting more and more of the population. So more and more of the population are having these kinds of experiences, knowing people that are in prison and dealing with these kinds of things. So, I believe because of the greed in the prison industrial complex, the days of not knowing and not caring what's happening inside of our prisons are fading. We see that with these laws. I think it was in Florida where they tried to pass a law around, or maybe they succeeded. I lost the end of that one, but to allow prisoners to vote. And not only prisoners that are out, but also prisoners that are actually still in prison. And then also we start to see more and more of these cases being revealed to the public, and more of the public actually caring about the prisoners.
That's a good note to end it on. All right, now moving on. Now hear me out when I say this, and I'm kind of vomiting in my mouth a little bit too. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. All right, hold on. You'd think this would be a negative article, but this is a very rare moment where I do agree with her. Hear me out again. Pelosi clashes with fellow Democrats in closed-door debate on impeachment. Right now, as it currently stands, and again, anything can change, because right now the establishment media and some establishment Democrats are kind of jumping up for joy that a few, maybe 2 Republicans right now have basically gone on the record that's saying that Trump should be impeached. But Speaker Nancy Pelosi basically is telling her allies, rejecting the call to move forward for now, according to a few sources. As it stands, Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island, Jamie Raskin of Maryland, and Joe Negros of Colorado, all members of Democratic leadership, pushed to begin impeachment proceedings during a leadership meeting with Pelosi's office. However, it's being ignored by Nancy Pelosi, indicating that she is against any form of strategy for the impeachment of President Trump. Now, again, just a quick reminder. You impeach Trump, guess who you're going to get? Good old Mike Pence, that crazy guy. Is that a gamble that Democrats really want to risk? Again, Now, right now, Raskin, a former law professor, said he wasn't advocating impeaching Trump, but suggesting that that opening an impeachment inquiry would strengthen their legal position, allowing Democrats to move forward with their legislative agenda. What I'm taking from this is more of still an aftershock that the Russiagate conspiracy never bloomed into something that the Democratic establishment and establishment media wanted. Remember, for 2.5 years, we kept on hearing this narrative that Trump is associated with Russia, Russiagate's real, and then that way we can get him out of office. All of a sudden, the Mueller report comes in, and nothing. That's it. 2.5 years wasted. Rachel Maddow's bread and butter is taken away, but she's still milking it as best she can. It's stupid that we're actually having this conversation now, and the Democrats want to make this political risk. I know that one presidential candidate in particular, Elizabeth Warren, has gone on the record saying that yes, there should be an impeachment investigation or inquiry into President Trump, but the consequence is that the Democrats right now have the House. They don't have the Senate, so anything they get done in the House is going to be ignored by the Senate because the Republicans control the Senate. And it's a risk. It's a gamble because it will be a distraction, especially for a lot of in the Democratic primary, because that's going to be something being brought up in the debates or at any town hall. Do you, Senator Bernie Sanders, or do you, Joe Biden, or do you, Cory Booker, or Tulsi Gabbard, or Andrew Yang, do you support the impeachment of President Trump? It's going to be a distraction. The talk of impeachment, what it will do is take away the talking point of policies and legislation that said Democratic candidate will be fighting for, because the talk of impeachment will overshadow everything else. And let's just say, for example, this impeachment proceeding fizzles out. The Democrats will again be shooting themselves in the foot, hoping to have a quick win. It's not worth the risk. And this is, again, where Nancy Pelosi seems to be on point for the moment, where she's at least telling her allies and in the Democratic leadership to stop. We should hold on this. And it's too much of a risk to do during this 2020 election cycle that we're getting close to. I don't know whether or not she's really going to rein them all in. I do hope that she is, sincere. Again, since I do hope she is sincere about this, because the risk of impeaching Trump would mean that there's a 50-50 chance in which it could be a victory for President Trump. I really doubt the Republicans in the Senate or the Republicans in the House are just going to say, you know what? We're just going to snap our fingers and just impeach Trump just like that. Mike Pence is president. They're not going to do that. They're never going to do that. And you're living in a fantasy world if you think that the Republicans in the House and Senate would do that. Kira, I want to get your thoughts on this.
I disagree. X gets a square.
Wow. Okay, let's hear. Let's hear why.
I think that not impeaching is the political risk. I think that Democrats are well known for being weak, for getting paid to lose, and for keeping the status quo where it is, because the status quo is what got them into power. And I believe that that's what Nancy Pelosi is doing here. I think that Nancy Pelosi is an outrageously calculated politician, but I don't think that she's calculated in the sense that she really cares for, she cares for her party insofar as like the people that agree with her and are on her side, but I think that Nancy Pelosi fights and is in the corner of Nancy Pelosi. Right now, as it stands, I was just kind of jogging my memory, and I don't have a great memory. I was jogging my memory for all of the reasons there are to impeach that doesn't involve Russia at all. Things like obstruction of justice, insurance fraud, campaign finance, emoluments clause violations. There are so many things to impeach him on. And when we go into impeachment proceedings, it becomes a national conversation in a way that, the Trump supporters can la all they want, but they're gonna know that when they go to cast their vote for Trump, which they will cast their vote for Trump, whether we impeach or not, so we might as well get that over that.
Right.
Getting any Trump supporters votes. Why are we even vying for that part of the population? So they can plug their ears and la all they want, but they know that when they go to cast their vote, they're casting their vote for a criminal. And I understand that the Senate is not going to go against the president. I get that. I've had this conversation with many people, so nothing is going to come of it. But I think that coming out strong, assertive, and doing your job is really, above all, the most important thing for Congress to do here.
So I hear what you're saying, but with everything that's kind of happened with the recent revelation of the Mueller report, and just really how you even heard people like Tulsi Gabbard, even Senator Bernie Sanders to some extent saying, look, it's time for us to move on, list the impeachment. I just think it's just way too much of a risk because there is some political backfire. This could turn out to be a Trump victory again, whether we like it or not. And when I look at somebody like President Trump, who is a criminal, who has done a lot of shady things in the past, I look at how many times he's been into court and how many times he's been, bankrupt. He's still, whatever kind of luck he has, because he knows how rigged the system is, he's still able to land on his feet. And the problem...
It's not called luck, it's privilege.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. He's just got buddies in the right places.
But the problem is that, you have this movement in the House then. What gets done in the Senate? Do the Republicans in the Senate do it? Of course, like you said, they're not going to.
No, they won't.
And I think it could take away from the talking points from especially progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders, because people are going to ask him, are you going to tell the Republican senators to impeach? Are you going to tell them to do this? And I think really it's going to take away from, like, here, I'm running for office because I know I could beat Trump on these policies, and I know that my legislation, what I've done, it makes me the stronger, more qualified candidate. I just think it goes to help out the Democratic establishment, saying like, well, yeah, let's beat Trump. I'm not Trump. You heard this from Hillary Clinton. You're even hearing this from former Vice President Joe Biden. Look, I am not Trump. Vote for me, remember me, and let's impeach Trump because it's something people want to hear. And I think it's just a distraction, and I don't think it's a risk worth taking at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not saying as a Democrat, because I identify myself as an independent. It's not saying that Democrats don't fight. I think this is a fight in which our resources are better on really getting our message out there, and why policies, especially like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard, why their policies and why they're the stronger candidate to beat Trump and his administration and hold them accountable. I think going through the proceedings of impeachment could take away their message and then help out establishment candidates like Joe Biden. And then we have a risk of having a neoliberal again running against Trump. And we all saw what happened in 2016 with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that Democrats want to hear the drumbeat of impeachment just because they think it's politically expedient. I authentically believe that a lot of our legislators want impeachment because our president is a criminal.
And he's not that smart.
Well, he's a total idiot. We can totally agree on that.
Okay, we can agree on that. I understand. I think for also a lot of people too, especially in power, I think it was a final note. It's like a lot of people are still in shock of what happened in 2016.
Yeah.
And look,
sometimes I still wake up in the morning and I reach over to my phone and I look at the CNN headline, and sometimes I think the CNN headline being a little hyperbolic, or poking fun maybe, because they'll give me some like horrific news, like 5 migrant children dead at the border or whatever, and then they're like, hope you enjoy your Wednesday. And I was like, are you serious?
But the issue is that with Trump, and I understand why again people are still a little bit angry about it, is that we got him he came to power because we have a corrupt neoliberal system. He came to power because no one expected somebody like him to come. And the thing is, we need to reform our political system, and we need to really, have a lot of new policies and get rid of this neoliberal system that we have. Because if, let's say, we're successful in taking out President Trump, and the system that created him in the first place isn't reformed or vastly changed, we could get another person like Trump. Only except the more frightening situation is that you can get somebody a little bit more competent.
Who has an IQ above 49?
Yeah, way more competent. So that's a final note. I want to end on it. And then now let's move on to our final story. And this has to deal with Trump and healthcare. What's going on?
Yeah, so California has joined nearly 24 states and municipalities in suing the federal government to stop a new rule that lets healthcare clinicians decline to provide abortions and other services that conflict with their moral or religious beliefs. So the suit is being brought by states and municipalities like Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, the District of Columbia, Hawaii, Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York City and state, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So those are the states that are bringing this suit forward. And so basically, the suit is in a response to a ruling put out by the Trump administration issued Thursday, so almost a week ago, by the Department of Health and Human Services. That is designed to protect religious rights of healthcare providers and religious institutions. In fact, inside of the rules, they don't even allow. They would actually allow anybody with what it is. It's a quote articulable connection to the patient. So that means that if you are the receptionist and you don't agree with whatever this person is coming in to your center or hospital for, you can actually deny them their services. So just an articulable connection. According to the Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights, the rule affirms existing, it's called conscience protections established by Congress. So most of the laws are pertaining to medical procedures such as abortions and birth control, sterilization, assisted suicide. The lawsuit says the rule effectively authorizes discrimination that could curb access to healthcare for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, among others. And Health and Human Services also changed the Office for Civil Rights mission statement to match what they're up to here. So they're pretty sly. And it went from, quote, to improve the health and well-being of people across the nation, to the new mission statement positioning the OCR as a law enforcement agency instead that enforces civil rights that, quote, protect the exercise of religious beliefs and moral convictions by individuals and institutions. So that's what's going on with these lawsuits and these healthcare providers.
Okay, so when I hear this, I can't help but think of the hypocrisy of some of these religious institutions that are just, saying, well, wait, what about us? It seems like that they're getting that, especially with support of this administration. Does the article actually go into detail about who in the United States Congress or House is actually stepping up to really call this thing out? Because I have to say, like, how many times do we need to wait for or turn a blind eye until we hear something from the people who we elect into power who will say that they are going to represent us or be for us? So, like,
it doesn't mention any legislators. It mentions the ACLU. Basically, taking the charge and filing these lawsuits.
Okay. Wow. Again,
there's a lot going on in the country right now, all over the place. So I can imagine that a lot of these legislators that do care about issues like this have their hands full with so many different issues, especially in healthcare right now. There's so many struggles with all of these abortion bans that are now front and center of attention, and
there's the risk of Roe v. Wade being overturned now.
Absolutely, and that is a real present threat for a lot of people. I feel like this is just another way for the right wing to wiggle in their religious,
conservative talking points.
Yeah, absolutely,
right.
and actually just imprison more people, and take away their freedoms. It's
again, this is why we really need to have single-payer healthcare, affordable healthcare in this country. I mean, the rest of the international community seems to have figured it out, and you don't see them talking about this.
And I didn't even think about that perspective of it. Could you imagine having an insurance that only allows you to go to a certain doctor?
Yeah. That's it.
And then that doctor says, you know what? I don't believe in premarital sex. You don't get birth control. And you're like, well, shit. What do I do now?
You got to ask yourself this too. And this is another important concept is that I remember when Bernie Sanders did that town hall with different people like about single-payer healthcare, why we need to have it in this country, and he actually brought in some people from different parliaments, and one of them was a conservative, and one of the questions that was brought up is, well, okay, you're a conservative. What if we brought America's healthcare policy towards your country? And the conservative, I forget which European parliament he was part of, but he said the people would be on the streets protesting. We don't want your system.
Yeah, they'd be setting the town on fire.
No, and so a lot of people across the world know how messed up our healthcare system is.
People in Europe totally know how messed up the healthcare system is. In fact, my mother is from Germany, so she immigrated here some time ago. She's now an American citizen, but it's amazing to have conversations with people who have, are a little bit more on the right than on the left, especially when they're related to you. But basically, my mom and I were having this conversation about socialism.
Right.
And she was very much like, anti-socialism, that's really bad, that doesn't work, and blah, blah, blah. And then she goes on to say, oh, but Germany's healthcare system is amazing. And she didn't even see the irony.
Yeah.
And, my mom doesn't pay a lot of attention. She doesn't have like a loudspeaker or anything like that, so I'm not as concerned about that. But this is the level of, this is the level of knowing and education that a lot of voters are going in to the voting booths with, thinking, hey, like, I really think socialism is bad, but gosh, that healthcare would be really great. And I think that as long as our candidates like Bernie Sanders, like Tulsi Gabbard, like Elizabeth Warren, like, all of these progressive candidates keep pushing this idea of healthcare being a right instead of some sort of like privilege you get if you were born into the right family with the right circumstance. I think that's going to speak volumes to people as long as the messaging is very clear.
Right.
Because I do think that one of the ways that something like this could be helped is by a single payer system, or just Medicare for all, free access to health care.
Well,
however, there still is something to be said for being a healthcare provider and then refusing to provide certain kinds of health care. And maybe some kind of provision can be made that they put it explicitly in their ads or on their websites. Hey, come to our facility, but we won't give you any of these services. I don't know how they will actually organize that.
At the end of the day, this is why this election is going to be important. This is why we need to have single-payer health care. This is why we need to step up and get involved, because you're going to see more policies like this being passed and implemented. So, with that being said, I think we're nearing the end of our show. So, I want to give a huge thank you to a lot of our viewers and subscribers. So, first, I'm going to start off with Nico House. Nico, if you're watching this, thank you so much for having us live stream on the Mikatsu Katsu YouTube channel. You have really been a big help for us. We're right now, again, for his audience and for our audience, we are kind of in the process of collaborating with him. More details on that later. But again, thank you, buddy, man. It's really good. You're doing a good job, too. Let's fight to build a strong, progressive, independent media network all across this country. I want to thank my wonderful co-host, Kira Elliott. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Shout out to Daniel for manning the board. I know we had a few issues here and there, but this man is on point. He has got a great system set up, and let's just remember, at one point, all we had here at Heartlands Media was a Galaxy S7 cell phone, and now we got a really good setup. And that's because of viewers and subscribers like all of you, subscribing to independent media, sharing the content, liking it, and even adding comments in there below. Whether you're critical or you're supportive, it really helps grow independent media. And
it is fun hearing from you guys.
Yeah, it is. Oh,
yeah.
It is. And we need to have dialogue, and we need to speak to people that are going to think differently, whether they're independent or libertarian, socialist, Democrat, Republican. We got to communicate with each other, because if we don't, we're going to live in stagnation. And are you going to change people's minds like that? No, but we got to communicate. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to the Hall of Heroes. Now, these are our Patreon supporters. These are the people that basically allowed us to get this brand new mixer, our wonderful camera setup. Our Patreon supporters, you are the main heart and backbone to Heartlands Media to build a strong, progressive, independent media network here in the city of Chicago.
We need some theme music going here.
I know. We do. Yeah, we do. Huge shout out to our Patreon supporters: Myra Alejandro Sanchez, Ishmael Rufus, Chase, Cassie Lloyd, Gregory Church, Kate, Sandra Ann Grayson, NC Shafter, Anthony Nelson, Cherry Claypool, Paula Williams, Teresa Collins, Brittany Cabrera, Desmond Turek, Jack Morse, Jeff Green, Sandra Mayer, Win Pauly, Lewis, Ashwin Ruvikumar, Rinakir, Jeff, Christopher Lempa, Susan Singer, Ramon Lazo, Ariana Hinzen, Giffy, and Kai Arnold. You guys are the main heart. And Kira, I'm surprised that you did that while I was reading it.
I'm a talented woman.
I guess so. Look, all we know is that you guys, our Patreon supporters, our viewers and subscribers are making this happen. Again, thank you to Nico House. Shout out to Daniel Lupker for manning the board. And shout out to Kira Elliott. Also, Hardlens Media. We are on every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. Saturday, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, where I'm joined with my two co-hosts, Paul DuPont and Daniel Lupker. And then finally for Sunday, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, Chicago Corner. That's where we talk about Chicago politics and Illinois politics. Other than that, guys, peace, everyone, and let's all do what we can to build a better future.